Hi, James. How are you doing?
I'm good, Sean. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. Thanks so much for wanting to talk.
Oh, well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I have to let you know I love Tumble Down, and as an indie filmmaker myself for the past 30 years, I know just how difficult it is to get out there and get something made. But I have to admit, you guys created one of the most unconventional love stories I've seen in some time, and I love the movie exactly because of that. Where did the story's inspiration come
cool
from?
To hear. This story was something that blossomed in my wonderful wife's imagination starting about 10 years ago. She and I were living in Los Angeles where we met. She had grown up in Farmington, this town in Maine in the woods where the film is set. And I think she was feeling a little nostalgia for her life in Maine and having these questions come to her about where best to live your life and whether the big city was for her, even though we were having success in Hollywood and really enjoying our friends and the work we got to do there. She was in development, I was in production, I was working on films that were really exciting, and she was developing scripts that she really liked and appreciated. She felt like she wanted to have characters work out these life questions, and at the same time she had recently suffered the loss of a very good friend from growing up there in Farmington, and she was sensing that her small hometown is about 7,000 people there.
Yeah.
And it was suffering the loss sort of as a community. And she and I were beginning to fall in love at the time that she felt this loss of a friend, and it just sort of struck her what would happen. What would happen if, just as you were falling in deep love and felt like you could see your future together stretching out in front of you, that was suddenly cut short. And that thought and all her thoughts about what it meant to live in Maine, what the choice of living frontier or in a beautiful, natural, inspiring place where you are a little bit cut off from society, thinking about those things all came together in the screenplay. And then over the course of the 8 years that it took, as you say, to finally get an indie film put together and actually make it, we worked together on the story, and it evolved a lot over those 8 years.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I found Tumbledown to be very unconventional, nothing like the formulaic love stories that Hollywood turns out every year. Was it more difficult trying to get the movie off the ground because of this element?
You know, it's funny. I feel like the unconventionality of it, the unique voice, is something that kept the project alive for year after year. And my sense of it was that the fear that it was just a rom-com or just a conventional film, that people do tend to look down their noses on the notion of the rom-com, that maybe it's too light and frivolous, or maybe the audience has dried up for it. And certainly my wife, Desi, she has a great sincerity and a great faith and positivity that I think comes through in the film. She really is a believer in goodness in people and in good outcomes in life. And, I think that there's a certain cynicism that people expect more often than not from some independent films, like independent films should be telling the truth, the hard truth of life. And maybe people didn't find that in this and thought, well, so what is it? Is it a commercial rom-com? Are you going to make it goofy and broad? I think that the divide between the humor and the levity and the lightness of the film, and also the serious topics and the desire to delve into questions of grieving and recovery and what your life should be, that was always the big question for people, whether we could pull off that bridge between the tones. And especially, I was the albatross around this film's neck for those 8 years. Everybody loved Desi's screenplay. They really did, and that's what kept it alive, but they were terrified of the first time feature director, especially when there was this tonal balance that had to be struck. So I'm just really glad at this point I feel like I didn't completely destroy Desi's wonderful screenplay, and we were able to actually make something that I'm so glad that you feel like it has some uniqueness and actual voice to it, because that was the hope, that I wouldn't just completely fumble that idea.
Yeah, like I said, I've as a filmmaker, but also as a movie critic, I see a lot of movies, and like I said earlier, it's one of the first films I've seen, kind of a romantic comedy that didn't fall into, I guess, the typical what you'd expect from a typical romantic comedy. It was completely different, and that's why it dragged me in from the beginning. I wanted to see where this was going.
Great.
And by the time the movie ended, I was very satisfied. I liked the way it unfolded from beginning to end. So yeah, I really liked it.
That's so cool to hear. That's great. Well, we were certainly helped by, you get thrown into the film by Rebecca Hall is so fascinating to watch. I think that, if we'd had somebody else that really didn't have that depth, it would feel like a more frivolous film. And I don't know that you'd care as much to kind of make your way through the meandering path that it takes. And the same with Sudeikis. He has that thing that we love in leading men and leading ladies. He has charisma. It's genuine. It's not forced.
Right.
And you can feel that intelligence sparking off him. So we got so lucky that those two were this combination that we got to work with, because I feel like they make the film better than even we imagined it could be.
Well, that was a question I was going to ask, is that Jason's known primarily for comedies, while Rebecca has done a lot more movies with serious tones. In Tumbledown, they both get to play to their strengths, but also to each other's. How did they become attached to the film, and were they the first actors you guys had in mind for the roles of Andrew and Hannah?
They weren't. I mean, like a lot of independent films, we had different versions of this movie that we pulled together over the years, and then for one reason or another wouldn't, come to pass. The first actor that was attached to it was Rose Byrne, who's a wonderful actress in her own right, and I think that she, is able to inhabit the world both of comedy and drama. She was attached for 3 years, and she, her faith in the project allowed us to get to Jason and get him attached. And Jason and I met early on and got to talk about how, comedians making that turn to more dramatic work, and how that's one of the most exciting things, I think, in film, is seeing more deeply into these actors that you think already.
Right.
And, Jason has a great intellect and a wonderful soulfulness. He's a really inquisitive man, and the turn that he's making in our film as an actor is kind of similar to the turn that the character makes, coming up and having a certain cynical remove or sarcastic approach to what this small town life must be like, and
exactly,
and also a cynical take on the artist's life and why he died. And then he needs to open himself up a little bit more and show a sensitive side. So that maneuver was similar both for the actor and the character, which I thought was a useful twinning there. And Rebecca became attached, I think, because when Rose wasn't able to make the schedule work, when we finally had everything together with that package, she was making about 6 movies at the same time. All of a sudden, it was just bad timing.
Yeah.
We thought it was all going to fall apart, but it turned into lucky timing that Rebecca had just finished doing this deep, deep drama, Machinal, on Broadway, where, she played the first woman ever electrocuted on the electric chair for murdering her husband. So she had gone to this very deep, dark place and was doing it 8 days a week, or 8 shows a week. And she was really ready to do something that she could have more fun with.
Yeah.
She was excited to work with Jason and sort of stretch into that realm. So I feel like Jason reaching towards a dramatic performance and Rebecca reaching towards something that she could have more fun with was a great sort of bridge that they built that helped us strike that tone.
I agree, because Jason, he's been in some other serious movies, but mostly comedies, and like I said, Rebecca, more serious movies. So it was great kind of seeing the two of them kind of play to each other's strengths, but also branch out into areas that, like you said, as a comedian, it's great to see, like, the late Robin Williams. He started out making slapstick movies, but then he matured and he made, Good Will Hunting and some other movies. So it was great seeing that progression for both of them. As well as Jason and Rebecca, you managed to assemble a first-rate supporting cast. Now, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and both Richard Masur and Griffin Dunne were in 2 of my all-time favorite horror films, The Thing and An American Werewolf in London. And Blythe Danner was in Future World. What was it like for you guys working with this cast?
I mean, it was such an incredible privilege and pleasure. That was, Griffin, I love, it's just jumped out of my mind. not Werewolf, but his Scorsese film,
After Hours.
After Hours.
Yeah.
After Hours was one of the first movies that I watched the filmmaking and loved the filmmaking and thought, wow, how cool would it be to tell a story visually this way? And this little adventure, it just felt like a perfect little movie. So he always has this fond place in my heart. So it was just a great privilege to be able to go after him and actually have the legitimacy that he'd be interested to come to play this role. And he on set, he and Jason clicked. Their humor was so in line that, you know, we almost just stopped on day 3 when we started shooting with Griffin. He was only there a few days. And he and Jason are riffing in the bookstore. We're just like, you know what, maybe we'll throw away the Tumbledown idea and just make a movie about these two guys.
Right.
He's got his little, you know, prosthetic gut and the ponytail that he wanted. Like, he had all these great ideas about how to make the guy really real. And Richard Masur, like a lot of people, I think I knew him he was just part of growing up. Like, he was in all of those movies and all those TV shows, and I just didn't know. I couldn't say, hey, I want that guy Richard. But as soon as, he came up, I felt this great fondness for him.
Yeah.
And he's such an incredibly experienced actor. He and Blythe both, I feel like those family scenes were such a great pleasure to work on. They were really hard because as an indie, we had no time, and to shoot a huge dinner scene like that, whereas, a bigger film would spend a couple of days on it, we had half a day to do it. We had 3 hours to shoot it. So to have these consummate professionals with so much experience sitting around the table means that we could just nail it in a couple takes, which is really all we got for any given setup. And they give you much, much more than you're not milking them, certainly for a performance. They're giving you gold every time. So that was so goddamn lucky, for my first feature to work with this caliber of people. And it's just a real testament to the screenplay that Desi wrote. It really won a lot of people over. People were excited to play these roles. They thought they were interesting and unique and got to do something they didn't get to do all the time. There's other material that we got to shoot with the family in particular that, wasn't able to fit into the movie. And it makes me sad because there's a lot of great stuff there.
Right. Yeah, you have to choose what stays in there and what has to go, but there's so much that could have gone in. Will there be deleted scenes on the DVD and Blu-ray?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't think it's going to end up on the DVD and Blu-ray. I wish I could say it could to you, because I know this is about that. I believe there are a few snippets on the DVD and Blu-ray. There was a misunderstanding with the distributors about what material was left over. I delivered a bunch of little bits and pieces to make a trailer.
Yeah. And
they thought those were deleted scenes, and then there are these great deleted scenes. I'm hoping that they become available as iTunes extras in a sort of another iteration of that iTunes release, but I fear that they won't be on the DVD because they didn't make it in time for production.
Because as a filmmaker, I love watching the behind the scenes. Sometimes for me, the making of the movie and deleted scenes are sometimes better than the movie, but in this particular case, is there a making of on the DVD?
There is a making of on the DVD. It's, not one of the great ones, I've got to say.
Right.
This is probably, Falco is like cringing right now.
Right.
I too, that's all I want to see. I want to see the behind the scenes that really shows you so much about how they capture these moments. I want to hear a great commentary track where you get to dive into what went into making all these scenes. That's my, I love that. It's such fun to dive into those worlds. And there is a behind the scenes on this film that shows you a little bit about the world that we were creating, and you get to hear the actors talk about, I guess, why they got excited about the characters. So there's some insight there. On any film, and especially on independent films, the story of how the movie got made and how everybody survived the shoot,
right,
and how people didn't end up killing each other is always a pretty fascinating story that is kept secret.
Right.
The lucky thing about our production is, though it was really, really challenging, there were never any giant battles. The cast and the central creative group was a really wonderful and fulfilling experience. Like Jason and Rebecca just they really did fall in love as friends. They'd never met before. We didn't get to rehearse that much.
Yeah.
But then on set, they had a groove that they fell into. And even when we weren't shooting, they just wanted to hang out and talk. And I really think that contributed to the great chemistry they had because it was sincere.
I agree. Yeah, it made the world a difference. Now, the story was set in Maine, but did you actually shoot it there, or did you shoot it maybe up in Canada?
We didn't shoot in Canada. We almost shot it there. The financing came out of Canada, and we edited in Vancouver.
Right.
But Maine does not have similar film incentives to other neighboring states in New England. So the financiers dictated that we had to shoot in a state with strong incentives. This tends to happen with a film that is a few $1 million. That was important to them. Luckily, Massachusetts has some of the most robust film incentives in the United States. And, central Massachusetts, where we shot, has a very similar feel and look to Maine. It's just a little bit spiffier. It's a wealthier region.
Yeah.
The spot in Maine that we were telling the story about is not quite that wealthy. But the great thing is Desi and I had spent the previous 8 years living in Maine, living in Portland, the big city in Maine, about an hour away from where the film was set.
Yeah.
So we were in a deep, immersive experience of the spot where the film was set. We were constantly going up there. We shot a lot of footage ourselves before the movie was shot that we were using to raise money to shoot, sizzle reels or display reels, trying to get people to shoot in that region. So we actually do have quite a bit of footage of the actual spot that the story is set. All of the panoramic exteriors are shots that we shot before the film was produced and are the actual place. Any shot that has an actor in it was shot in Massachusetts.
Well, let me ask you one final question then. Are you working on any upcoming projects that you could tell us about?
We're both writing screenplays now that would result in similar movies that are about human beings, are heartfelt, and are funny. That's about as far as I can say about that. I'm very lucky that Tumbledown has caught the eye of a few independent producers who I respect immensely. And I feel really privileged that a couple of them are in discussions with me now about attaching to independent films that they're trying to make. The one that is the closest and that we're the most excited about right now is a project with the great independent producer Michael London, who has a project that he's been fond of for about a decade. It's similar to Tumbledown in that it's been a lot of years in the making,
right.
And it's a very special project to him. It's got a similar tone to Tumbledown, and it's about the complexities in life and how funny that could be, as opposed to solving very basic dramatic equations. And that film is called Buttercup. So right now we're going out to cast and hoping to be able to make it either this summer or this fall.
Okay, terrific. Well, folks, today I spoke with Sean Mewshaw. He's the director of the new dramedy Tumbledown, which stars Jason Sudeikis and Rebecca Hall and comes out on DVD and Blu-ray April 5th, courtesy of Anchor Bay. Sean, thanks so much for your time, and I wish you the best of luck with your next project.
Thanks so much for the talk. I really had fun.